When you do something horrible, you deserve to be punished for it. Let's take a look at the most dramatic convicts reacting to life sentences. This is for educational purposes only. Here's a 15-year-old kid who was given a life sentence for killing his great-grandmother for money. He committed the crime back in 2012 and he was just 13 years old at the time. He and his friend killed the great-grandmother who was 78 years old with a hatchet and hammer. The kid won't be eligible for release until he's 50 years old.
They understand the seriousness of the crime.
Barbeau will almost certainly start his prison sentence at the Department of Corrections, Lincoln Hills School for Boys, north of Wausau.
This man was sentenced to life in prison without parole after killing a woman. While receiving his sentence, the convict started having a breakdown while crying and then collapsed to the floor. The family in which he caused pain said this was the first step towards healing.
He took her from me. She was beautiful. Her beauty was not just skin deep. She had a beautiful heart, mind, and soul. She was a little sister, a big sister, a niece, aunt, cousin, granddaughter, and my daughter.
The judge sentenced Smith Riley to life in prison without parole for Brooks, and more time after that for Martin, and still more time for using a Smith Riley collapsed to the floor.
In the House Department of Corrections, mandatory consecutive underlying offenses, all those counts are consecutive each other. Get credit for time served, amount of 349 days.
The families say this was the first step toward healing.
Here's a teen who was given life in prison without parole for the second time. Yeah, I'm not really sure how that is even possible, but it must be. The boy's reaction is a bit different than other convicts in this video, and he smirks and laughs when hearing his sentence, showing a complete lack of remorse that's just messed up.
No indication that this type of violent behavior will stop.
Criminal history and odds of rehabilitation must be considered before life without parole is imposed.
The court has significant doubts about the defendant's potential for rehabilitation.
His mom said little when it was over.
It's what the judge ordered, so that's what it is. It is what it is.
But Lindsay actually grinned when the judge read his ruling, the lack of remorse not lost on David Crawford's daughter, Amanda.
Justice was served, and I'm glad it's over, and it just kind of proves to me that he's an animal as he sat there smiling.
This woman was convicted for hiring a hitman to take out her boyfriend. Throughout the court proceedings, a woman repeatedly called the judge racist and insisted that her punishment, which ended up being life in prison without parole, was unjust.
Please let me. Because you have always been disrespectful to me, and you don't like black people, and you definitely don't like me.
When you try to flip the script, when you play the race card in a disgusting fashion, but most importantly, when you manipulate the system of justice by murdering a witness in a criminal trial, you will pay for it the harshest possible penalty, and therefore, you, madam, will be sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole. I'm going to fine you $20,000 in count one and order you to pay your court costs. You'll never be released, so we're not going to talk to you about post-release control.
I already know you ain't gonna release me, and I ain't gonna see you no more. I'm glad that I don't have to even see you. I ain't got to see you in the drug case.
Well,
it's over.
You're going to be back in here with that drug case with me too.
Oh, well. You gonna read that up too?
Sheila, you're not done.
Y'all gonna read that up too? Y'all gonna find me?
Now, we have a teen who was all dressed up in a suit trying to look his best in court. However, it doesn't help at all because he did, after all, murder somebody. Nothing you do is going to get you out of the punishment, even wearing a nice suit. It seems like he knows this because as he's getting sentenced, he doesn't even flinch, just puts his head down in disappointment.
On indictment number 2013-1446001, the jury, having returned a verdict of guilty, murder in the first degree on deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty, you will hearken to the sentence the court has awarded against you. The court, having duly considered your offenses, it is hereby ordered that you be committed to the Department of Youth Services until the age of 21, and furthermore committed to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction for the period of not less than 25 years and not more than life, and that you stand committed in execution of this sentence.
This lady tries to say everything right to get a lesser sentence. The judge makes it seem like she is going to go easy on her, and then boom, out of nowhere she sentences the convict to life.
I had to fight for my life just like I did on June 4th, 2008, because I realized how selfish it would be for me to escape accountability for this mess that I've created. I have 2 brothers, 2 sisters, several nieces and nephews, a mom, a dad, 8 aunts, 9 uncles, over 20 cousins that I've grown up with, as well as countless friends, all of whom would suffer greatly if I took my own life or if I allocated and begged for the death penalty and then got it. The most important thing I want to say is that I am very sorry for the enormous pain that I've caused the people that love Travis. I'm horrified because of what I did, and I wish there was some way I could take it back.
Court finds the defendant has no prior criminal history. The defendant has family and community support. The defendant has mental health issues. The court has also considered the defendant's childhood background. The court finds the mitigation presented is not sufficiently substantial to call for leniency and that a natural life sentence is appropriate. It is ordered the defendant shall be incarcerated in the Department of Corrections for the rest of her natural life with no...
Now we have a former police officer who did some very messed up things, leading him to court with 5 charges against him. When he hears the sentencing and what the judge is saying, he breaks down into tears as a full-grown man.
Punishment at 8 years. Count 2. Not guilty of the crime of... Count 3. Burglary in the first degree. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of burglary in the first degree, nor lesser included. Count 4. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procure. Punishment is set at 5 years. Count 5. Defendant is guilty of the crime. 31. By instrumentation. Defendant is guilty of the crime of, and punishment is set at 12 years. Count 32. Defendant is guilty. Mr. Holtzclaw, this jury finds you guilty of the various counts. You will be remanded to the custody of the Oklahoma County Sheriff for formal sentencing set January 21st, 2016 at 10 o'clock a.m. All right, you have a seat. The custody of the sheriff. You're excused.
This teen started a fire which ended up ruining somebody's life. This led to him getting a sentence of life in prison, and you can see in the clip how much he regrets his actions and how he's crying and begging not to be sent to jail.
If there is something said significant, an intention, and immediately starting another fire for the...
I agree with the family. I hope you prison as well.
Here's a teenager who murdered his girlfriend's little boy after brutally beating him. In the courtroom, he starts crying and apologizing for his actions. A lot of people actually believe he did this to try to get a shorter sentence, including the judge actually, but it didn't end up working as he is now serving a life sentence behind bars.
I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot. I didn't mean to kill Austin. Actually, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him. I wish I could. I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
Austin Smith was completely defenseless. That's a given. But there were other dynamics at work there, including my client's inability to either control his anger or frustration and his inexperience in babysitting.
Based on his short life now, what is to say he won't do this again?
Well, we don't know that. I think it's completely unlikely. It was a situational, circumstantial thing.
I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me, end quote.
Afterwards, Shoemaker was sentenced to 25 years to life behind bars.
This 16-year-old girl was charged with manslaughter and robbery after she planned a kidnapping of a 19-year-old. What makes this even more heartbreaking is that the 16-year-old had a bright future ahead of her. She was the lead singer of a band and was actually pretty good at singing.
Brigg pleaded guilty to unarmed robbery and manslaughter in Frolka's death. The 19-year-old's body was found along I-69 last February. He had been beaten with brass knuckles, in a band.
Coming up next is a woman who was captured on video screaming at a judge after being sentenced to 80 years in prison for shooting her husband. She was also convicted for shooting her 14-year-old daughter, although she denies this, claiming it was actually her husband that shot the child and she shot him in retaliation.
They never promised anything. Nobody ever said, they never even had a motive. Why? Why? How can you sit there and say that I killed my daughter? How? You have no, how can you say the things that you're saying? Because I wrote on the wall, I wrote on the mirror, this is all your fault. I didn't confess to killing anybody. I talked about the pills. Mrs. Johnson. Nicole, Miss Rooney, she's talking about Ruben was begging for his life. Was she there? Is there any record that says I said Ruben was begging for his life? I mean, come on, John. You have never agreed to anything. Every time Mr. Bessie has ever said anything, you have always denied him the right to say anything. To say anything. How can you even sit there and say the evidence? What evidence? None of the evidence you're saying. No, it's not true. Mrs. Johnson. Judge, you are not a fair judge. You are not. You talk about the evidence. You don't even know what the evidence really was. None of that stuff she talked about was true. She talked about me waiting for Ruben to come home. They talked about Aaliyah not even being in the house that morning. That Aaliyah was somewhere in UTC. Okay. She was 14. How did you get to UTC? They talked about me just standing over Ruben and shooting him. Ruben was standing up when I shot him. I shot him because he shot my daughter. She's not fair. What kind of judge is that?
Here's a man who leapt from a 3-story courtroom after being sentenced to 13 years in prison. He was sentenced for felony assault and attempted murder after shooting a man in the face.
Earning his fate, a 13-year prison sentence, Jason Binkowitz got away from the sheriff's deputy escorting him to the elevator and leapt to his death after jumping over the railing on the 3rd floor of the Jefferson County Courthouse. The fall about 100 feet. Jefferson County Sheriff Fred Abdallah says that Binkowitz's hands were shackled, though his ankles were not due to issues with swelling.
If he did have them on, there's enough movement in them that he could have still made it to the railing and jumped over.
Moments after the jump, emergency crews were on scene. Later, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation arrived to collect evidence, and because a sheriff's deputy was involved, the Steubenville Police Department is handling the investigation along with the Attorney General's office. Going forward, Jefferson County officials say they will take a close look at security.
Well, I think we're going to look at everything. You know, it's a terrible day for this to have happened, and I think that we will look at everything we can to make sure that nothing like
this. Next offender killed a man in an attempted robbery. He says in the video that he is very sorry for his actions, apologizes to the mother for breaking her heart, and says that he's ready to serve his punishment. At least he owned up to his actions, unlike some of the other convicts in this video.
It's time out to apologize to the family. I'm sorry for what I did. I know it was wrong. Now I'm here to take my punishment for what I did. I want to apologize to my mom. I'm sorry for that. I did way better than that. I'm sorry for breaking your heart.
Here's a woman who was recently sent to prison after taking the lives of 3 of her family members and then a social worker. Apparently, she had blamed her family and the social worker for taking her daughter away from her. So, in an act of revenge, she showed up to the family home and took out anyone who was there.
I don't know if I will ever forgive Jody for what she has done to me and my family.
Herring has previously admitted to killing social worker Lara Sobel in August 2015, and 3 of Herring's relatives, Regina Herring, Rhonda Herring, and Julianne Falzerano.
We all know that these birthdays and the anniversaries and the holidays return each year, and with them, the empty reminder of everything we no longer have.
Sobel's husband Tim says one of their daughters spoke with her mom on the phone as the 48-year-old left her office in Barrie.
Having spoken her last words to her mother, her answer was the noise of Mommy being shot down, not once, but twice.
My sister was anything but a model of professionalism and integrity, dedicated to the protection of the children of the state of Vermont.
I asked for help several times, and I didn't get it.
Prosecutors called the murders methodical. Both families called on the court to send a message in its sentence.
For me, these 27 months have been incredibly long
And the jury.
And that's all we have time for on the most dramatic convicts reacting to life sentences. See you in the next one.